I always trusted her. When you've been with someone for years, you stop questioning certain things, you know. Like how she laughed a little too hard at her best friend's husband's jokes. Or how they'd have these playful arguments at dinner parties, drawing the kind of attention that made everyone else feel like a third wheel. But it was harmless. At least, that's what I told myself. It wasn't until that night, 3 weeks ago, that I started seeing the cracks in our marriage. It's funny how you can live with someone, sleep beside them every night, and still be blindsided by who they really are. She had this thing she'd do: she'd get dressed up, nothing fancy, just her usual leggings and a long coat, hair tied back casually, like she wasn't trying too hard, but somehow, she looked stunning. I used to love that about her. The way she could pull off effortless beauty. She'd say she was going over to her best friend's place to help out, that her friend needed her, needed a shoulder to lean on because her marriage was rocky. It was always about the other couple, never us. I didn't even question it, not when they'd known each other for so many years. Until that night. The night I decided to follow her. I'd been noticing the subtle things, the shift in her voice when he called, the extra attention to her makeup before girls' night, the sudden protectiveness over her phone. And then, she started coming home later. Little things. Things that most people would ignore, but I couldn't. Something wasn't sitting right. So I did what I never thought I'd do. I followed her. She said she was going to her best friend's house, but that wasn't where she ended up. Instead, I watched as she parked a few streets away from their place, sneaking out of the car like she didn't want to be seen. And there he was, her best friend's husband, waiting for her, in front of their house, as if they were about to pull off some clandestine meeting. I should have left right then. Turned the car around and gone home. But I couldn't. Something about the way she smiled at him as she walked up to the door, the way he leaned in and touched her arm, told me everything I needed to know. And then, without even a glance back, they disappeared inside. That was the moment my world collapsed. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought I might break it. The rational part of me, the part that wanted to believe in our marriage, in her, kept trying to find an explanation. Maybe they were just talking? Maybe it wasn't what it looked like? But deep down, I already knew the truth. I had a choice. I could walk away and pretend I hadn't seen anything, confront her later and give her the chance to spin some story. Or I could stay and face the reality head on, as brutal as it might be. I chose the latter. I wasn't going to live in the dark anymore. I quietly got out of the car, staying far enough behind that they wouldn't notice me. Their house was at the end of the street, tucked away like it was hiding something. I had no idea how long they'd been meeting here, but something about the whole situation felt too practiced, too comfortable. When I got closer, I heard it. Laughter. Her laughter. A sound that used to bring me joy now felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I crept around the side of the house, staying close to the shadows. There was a window slightly cracked open, and that's when I heard their voices. At first, it was just casual talk, his voice, low and smooth, and hers, playful. But then the tone shifted. I couldn't make out all the words, but I didn't need to. The intimacy was clear. It wasn't the kind of conversation two friends should be having, especially not when one of them is married to your best friend. That's when I heard her say it. I've missed this. Missed us. Us. I felt sick.
My hands were shaking, and for a split second, I thought I might throw up.
They were inside, probably laughing at their little secret while I stood outside like an idiot, listening to the pieces of my life break apart. I should have burst in right then. Confronted them. Made a scene. But something stopped me. A dark, twisted part of me wanted to wait. To see just how far they'd go, to gather all the evidence before I burned it all down. I didn't confront her that night. I wanted to. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to kick the door down and drag them both out into the street, to show them for what they were, liars, cheaters. But I didn't. Maybe it was the shock, or maybe it was something else. Some part of me wasn't ready to end it just yet. So I went home. I remember sitting on our bed, staring at the empty side where she slept, wondering how long she'd been slipping out to meet him while I was too blind to see it. Was I really that stupid? Or had I just ignored all the signs because it was easier to pretend nothing was wrong? When she came back later that night, she didn't even look guilty. She just slipped off her shoes, brushed her long dark hair out of her face, and gave me that same tired smile she always did after helping her friend. I watched her get ready for bed, her movements slow and casual, completely unaware that I knew everything. She slipped into bed beside me like nothing had changed. And for her, I guess it hadn't. But for me? Everything had. I needed to plan my next move carefully. If I confronted her, she'd lie. She was too good at it, too used to playing the role of the supportive wife, the concerned friend. I wasn't about to let her control the narrative. No, I needed to make sure when this blew up, it took everyone down with it. Over the next few days, I started paying attention to every little detail. The way she texted more often, her phone always angled away from me. The way she would leave for errands or meetings at odd hours, always with that same calm, practiced smile. I wondered how long she'd been doing this, sneaking around, lying so smoothly that I never even questioned her. I thought about how many times I'd told her to go, to help her friend or be there for her. It felt like I had been a willing participant in my own betrayal. But now, I was watching everything. There was this weird satisfaction in knowing what she didn't. It was almost like a game. Each time she left the house, each time she sent a message, I made a mental note. I wanted to gather as much as I could, so when I finally exposed her, there would be no way for her to weasel out of it. Meanwhile, her best friend, the one whose marriage she was slowly tearing apart, had no idea. The irony was sickening. I'd seen them together so many times, laughing over wine, planning weekend getaways, all while my wife was secretly screwing her husband. The very man she trusted most was the one betraying her. I started imagining how I would tell her. Would I just casually drop it into conversation? Or should I show her the proof? Maybe send her a message, an anonymous tip? The idea of watching it all blow up right in front of their eyes was tempting, but I needed to be smart about it. I needed to make sure when I lit the match, the whole thing went up in flames. Once I had decided to stay quiet, to play the long game, things got darker. I became obsessed with catching them in the act, getting undeniable proof. It wasn't enough to hear her lies or watch her slip out of the house with that practiced ease. No, I needed something solid. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. So, I started following her more often. It was easier than I thought it would be. She trusted me, probably more than I deserved at this point. I think that's what hurt the most, realizing how much I had let that trust blind me. One night, about a week after I first followed her, she said she was heading to her best friend's again. This time, I was prepared. I waited until she was gone, then I grabbed my coat and followed her in my car. I stayed far enough back so she wouldn't notice me, but close enough that I wouldn't lose her. It wasn't long before she pulled up to the same spot, that familiar street a few blocks away from their house. She parked just like before, acting like this was some covert operation, as if sneaking around like a teenager made her affair more exciting. I watched as she walked toward the house, her long dark hair flowing over her shoulders, her silhouette illuminated briefly under the streetlights. The way she moved, so confidently, so sure of herself, made me feel sick. She had no idea I was watching. No idea I was just a few steps behind, waiting for the perfect moment to blow her world apart. I crept closer, staying in the shadows, my pulse racing. This time, I wasn't going to leave empty-handed. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The betrayal wasn't enough anymore, I needed the confirmation, the cold, hard truth. I didn't have to wait long. The back of their house had a small patio, mostly hidden by tall bushes. I crouched low, moving slowly, careful not to make a sound. I felt like a thief in my own life, sneaking around just to catch my own wife in her lies. But what I saw next, I wasn't prepared for. Through a crack in the curtains, I saw them. Together. She was standing close to him, too close. Her hand resting on his chest, his fingers trailing up her arm. There was no mistaking it now, this wasn't some innocent meeting between friends. This was an affair, plain as day. They didn't even bother to hide it inside the house, like they thought they were invisible, like nobody would ever catch them. I felt the blood rush to my face, my heart pounding in my ears as I watched them kiss. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss either, it was slow, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. My stomach twisted. I should have looked away, should have stopped myself from seeing more, but I couldn't. I was frozen there, watching the life I thought I had crumble in front of me. She was leaning into him now, her body pressed against his, and I could feel the rage building inside me. This wasn't just a fling. This was deeper, something they'd been nurturing for God knows how long. I thought about barging in, ending it right then and there. But no, if I did that, it would all be too easy for them to turn it around, too easy to dismiss it as a mistake, some one-time thing. I needed to ruin them both. Her best friend deserved to know, and I wanted to make sure she found out in the worst way possible. I stood there in the cold for what felt like hours, watching them, unable to move. It was like I'd become a stranger in my own life, watching everything unfold from the outside. The man I used to be, the one who trusted her, who believed in our marriage, was gone. I didn't recognize myself anymore. When I finally walked away from their house that night, my mind was made up. There was no more room for doubt, no more second guessing. She was cheating on me with her best friend's husband, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. But confronting her in the heat of the moment wouldn't satisfy me. That would be too easy. She'd cry, maybe beg for forgiveness, and who knows? I might have been weak enough to believe her. That's what scared me the most, that even after seeing it with my own eyes, part of me would still want to believe her lies. No, I needed to take my time. I needed to make sure there was no escape for her, no way to wriggle out of this mess she had created. And I knew exactly where to start. The next morning, I went through her phone while she was in the shower. It was risky, but I was beyond caring at this point. I found what I was looking for almost immediately, dozens of messages between her and him. Some of them were innocent enough, casual conversations about nothing. But then there were the others. The ones that made my blood boil. They weren't just meeting up when she said she was helping her friend. They were stealing moments at parties, family gatherings, even in our own home when they thought no one was looking. I felt like I'd been living in some sick joke, completely unaware while they carried on right under my nose. That's when I decided. I wouldn't just confront her. I'd tell her best friend. I'd make sure their marriage crumbled just like mine was about to. After seeing the messages, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't just going to confront her, I was going to end it in a way she wouldn't see coming. I spent the next few days pretending everything was normal, watching her go about her routine as if she hadn't already destroyed our marriage. The more she smiled at me, the more I felt the anger bubbling up inside. It was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. Her best friend had no idea. She still invited us over for drinks, still messaged my wife about weekend plans, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband and my wife were betraying her every chance they got. The thought of it made me sick. How could my wife smile and laugh with her, knowing what she was doing behind her back? I started planning. If I was going to drop this bombshell, I had to do it right. I didn't want it to be just a casual conversation, some private confession that could be swept under the rug. No, I wanted it to hit like a wrecking ball. I wanted to watch the fallout as it tore everything apart. The next time we were invited over to their place, I saw my opportunity. It was a small gathering, just the four of us. They always felt comfortable with us, like we were part of this tight-knit group that nothing could break. But I knew better now. The bonds we shared were tainted, rotting from the inside, and soon, everyone else would know too. My wife was laughing and chatting, acting like the perfect friend and wife, while I sat there, barely able to look at her. Her best friend's husband, on the other hand, kept stealing glances at her when he thought no one was watching. I could see it now, the tension between them, the secret they were carrying, and it made me sick to my core. I knew this would be the night I'd pull the trigger. The night I would ruin them both. I could barely focus on the conversations that evening. The usual small talk, the light-hearted banter, all of it felt like noise. My mind was racing, but I kept my cool. The funny thing is, when you know something that no one else does, it gives you this strange kind of power. I could see the little cracks no one else saw, the fleeting glances, the subtle touches when they passed by each other. It was all so obvious now. They thought they were so careful. So smart. But their whole little charade was about to come crashing down. At one point, her best friend and I ended up in the kitchen alone, grabbing more drinks. I looked at her, wondering how someone could be so unaware of what was happening right under her nose.
She was kind, always had been, and for a brief second, I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do.
But then I reminded myself that she deserved to know. She had a right to the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. You know, I started casually, watching her as she opened a bottle of wine. I've been meaning to ask you something. She smiled, oblivious to what was coming. Yeah? What's up? I hesitated for a split second, then pushed forward. Have you ever noticed how close our spouses have been lately? Her brow furrowed a little, but she still didn't catch on. What do you mean? I shrugged, trying to seem casual. I don't know, it's just. I've noticed them spending a lot of time together. More than usual. She laughed it off, pouring the wine. Oh, come on. They've been friends for years. You know that. Her dismissal stung, but I pressed on. Yeah, I know. But I don't know. Sometimes it feels like there's more to it than just friendship. She stopped, her hand hovering over the bottle, her smile faltering. I could see the first seeds of doubt planting in her mind, and I knew I had her. We returned to the living room, wine glasses in hand, and I felt the tension build like a coiled spring. My heart raced as I exchanged glances with my wife and her best friend's husband. I could see the flicker of recognition in my wife's eyes, the hint of worry that maybe something was off, something was about to be unveiled. But I was in control now, and I planned to keep it that way. I casually steered the conversation back to the two of them, watching how they interacted, waiting for the right moment to drop the bomb. As the evening wore on, we settled into the familiar rhythms of laughter and teasing. I could see my wife leaning into him, her laughter bright and carefree. It made my stomach churn. I was about to shatter this illusion, and I relished the thought of it. "Hey," I said, interrupting their laughter, "I think we should play a game." Her best friend looked at me, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "What kind of game?" "Truth or dare," I suggested, a wicked smile creeping across my face. "Let's spice things up a bit." They agreed, not knowing what was coming. The first few rounds were innocent enough, but I could see the tension brewing beneath the surface. With each round, I subtly guided the conversation, forcing the two of them to reveal bits of themselves. I needed to set the stage just right. When it was my wife's turn, I leaned in closer, a glint of mischief in my eyes. "Truth or dare?" She raised an eyebrow, the playfulness in her demeanor still intact. "Truth." I paused, letting the silence stretch out for a moment, making sure all eyes were on her. "Have you ever kissed someone you shouldn't have?" Her smile faltered, and I watched as the realization hit her. I felt the air in the room shift, her best friend's gaze darting between the two of us, her confusion palpable. The room went silent, the laughter dying as my question hung in the air. My wife's eyes widened for a split second, and I could see her brain working overtime to come up with a plausible response. But this was it. The moment I had orchestrated. She swallowed hard, the nervousness creeping into her voice. I mean, it was a long time ago. Just a stupid mistake, nothing serious." Her best friend's expression shifted from confusion to concern, her eyes narrowing as she processed what I was implying. "Wait, what are you talking about?" I leaned back, letting the weight of my words settle. "You know, mistakes happen. People kiss people they shouldn't, right?" I smiled, though my insides were churning. "Are you serious right now?" My wife snapped, the panic starting to seep into her tone. "What are you trying to say?" Her best friend looked from me to her, a dawning realization flickering in her eyes. "What's going on here?" I could see my wife struggling to maintain her composure, and it thrilled me. She had built her world on lies, and I was about to tear it all down. "I'm just saying," I continued, "that maybe your friendship with her husband isn't as innocent as you want everyone to believe." I turned to her best friend, who looked completely bewildered. "You really should ask your husband about his late-night meetings." The air in the room thickened. My wife's face drained of color, and I could see the panic rising. Her best friend's mouth fell open in shock as the truth began to dawn on her. "What are you saying?" she finally managed, her voice trembling. I met my wife's eyes, feeling a rush of satisfaction as the reality of my words sank in. "I'm saying you should ask him if he's been spending more time with my wife than you think." The silence that followed was deafening. My wife stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, desperately searching for a way to spin this back in her favor. But there was no escaping now. The lies had woven too tight, and I was the one holding the scissors. Her best friend looked from her to me, her brow furrowed, disbelief etched across her face. "Is this true?" she finally asked my wife, her voice laced with a mixture of anger and hurt.
I didn't mean for it to happen," my wife stammered, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade.
The confidence that once radiated from her was fading fast, replaced by fear. "We were just being friends." "Friends?" I scoffed, stepping closer to her. "Is that what you call it? Texting behind her back? Sneaking around? Because that doesn't sound like friendship to me." "Stop it," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I shot back. "I followed you. I saw you. You think you can just do this and pretend it's nothing?" Her best friend's eyes widened in horror, realization washing over her like a tidal wave. She turned to me, a mixture of confusion and rage brewing in her expression. "You followed her? You've known this whole time?" I nodded, refusing to break eye contact with my wife. "Yes. I watched her betray you, and now you deserve to know the truth." "Is it true?" her best friend pressed, turning back to my wife, the betrayal already written all over her face. "Did you really sleep with him?" My wife looked between us, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. It was as if the world around her was crumbling, and she was powerless to stop it. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said again, her voice now barely above a whisper. "It was a mistake. I thought I could just talk to him." I could see her trying to navigate the emotional wreckage, trying to save her own skin. But there was no saving this. The truth was out, and it was more than just a mistake, it was a betrayal that would rip their friendship, and our marriage, to shreds. Her best friend stepped back, shaking her head in disbelief. How could you do this to me? Her best friend stood there, visibly shaken, her expression a mix of disbelief and hurt. It was a stark contrast to the laughter that had filled the room just moments before. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I watched the chaos unfold. It was almost surreal, like a scene from a movie where everything I had been building toward was finally coming to fruition. Please, just listen to me, my wife begged, her voice trembling as she stepped closer to her friend. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought it was just a phase, just something we could laugh off later. A phase? Her best friend echoed, her voice rising. You thought this was just a joke? You slept with my husband. The words hung heavy in the air, sharp as glass. I could see my wife's confidence shatter, the facade she had so carefully crafted crumbling before us. She looked desperate, reaching for her friend's arm, but her friend recoiled, as if burned by the touch. No. Don't you dare touch me, she shouted, tears welling in her eyes. You think you can just pretend this never happened? You think I'm going to forgive you? I'm so sorry. My wife cried, her voice breaking. I made a mistake, and I'll do anything to fix this. Fix it? Her friend repeated, incredulous. How do you plan on fixing this? You destroyed everything. I watched as their friendship unraveled right in front of me. The two women who had shared countless secrets, late-night chats, and laughs were now facing the devastating consequences of betrayal. It was surreal and gut-wrenching, and yet, I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. What about my husband? Her best friend pressed, her eyes blazing with fury. What about his lies? What about the promises he made to me? My wife's face fell, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of realization that her actions had consequences far beyond just our marriage. You need to talk to him, I said, my voice cold and firm. He's the one who got you into this mess in the first place. As my words settled in the air, I knew I had done my part. I had exposed the truth, and now the fallout would rain down on both of them. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, each second stretching into eternity. Her best friend's anger morphed into something darker, a combination of betrayal and disbelief. She stood there, breathing heavily, as if trying to process the enormity of what had just been revealed. Did you even think about me? About how this would affect our friendship? She spat at my wife, her voice laced with venom. My wife looked lost, her eyes darting around as if searching for a lifeline. I never meant for this to happen, she stammered. I was just trying to be there for him. For you. For me? Her friend shot back, incredulous. You thought that being there for me meant sleeping with my husband? You thought that was okay? The hurt in her voice was palpable, and it struck a chord deep within me. I had seen that pain before, when my wife had lied to me, when I had been blind to the signs. And now, here we were, trapped in this cycle of betrayal, chaos, and shattered trust. I can fix this, my wife said desperately, her voice rising. Just give me a chance to explain. I'll talk to him, I promise. Talk to him? Her friend echoed, disbelief still etched on her face. You think that's going to fix this? You've crossed a line that can't be undone. You need to understand that. I could see my wife's composure slipping further. The confident woman I had once known was gone, replaced by a desperate, broken version of herself. And part of me felt a twinge of sympathy, but it quickly vanished in the face of the betrayal she had committed. The doorbell rang, pulling everyone's attention momentarily. My heart raced as I realized who it was, her best friend's husband, oblivious to the storm brewing inside. I'll get it, I said, barely holding back the urge to smile. Let's see how he reacts to this little family reunion. As I walked to the door, I felt a sense of triumph wash over me. This was the moment when everything would collide, the lies, the betrayal, and the truth. I opened the door, and there he stood, her best friend's husband, completely unaware of the chaos he was about to walk into. He had that familiar relaxed demeanor, that easy smile that used to make me feel at ease. But now, it felt like a mask hiding the ugly truth underneath. Hey, man. What's up? He greeted, stepping into the living room. The tension in the air was palpable, but he didn't seem to notice as he scanned the room. I thought we were all hanging out tonight. Before I could answer, his eyes fell on my wife and her best friend, both standing in a kind of frozen tableau, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and hurt. What's going on? He asked, concern creeping into his voice. Why don't you take a seat? I said coolly, gesturing toward the couch. We need to talk. His smile faded as he took in the scene, the way his wife was staring at my wife, the tears shimmering in her eyes, the anger and despair etched across their faces. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his tone suddenly serious. "I wouldn't say so," I replied, crossing my arms. "In fact, I think you might want to hear what's been going on between your wife and my wife." "What are you talking about?" he asked, confusion clouding his features. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "Your wife just found out that her best friend has been sleeping with you." The words hung in the air like a lead weight, and I watched as realization dawned on his face. His eyes darted from me to my wife, and then to his wife, whose expression had turned from shock to fury. No, that's not true," he stammered, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That's insane." "Insane?" I challenged, leaning forward. "I've seen the texts. I know everything. It's time for the truth to come out." "Is this true?" his wife shouted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Have you really been cheating on me?" I watched as he floundered, unable to come up with a coherent response. He opened and closed his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. It was a beautiful sight, the man who had played both sides now trapped in the web of his own deceit. His face paled as he looked between his wife and my wife, and I could practically see the gears turning in his head as he processed the situation. "Look, I can explain," he finally said, desperation creeping into his voice. "It's not what it seems." "Not what it seems?" his wife echoed, disbelief dripping from her words. "What could possibly justify this? You've been lying to me. To us." "I swear, I thought it was just a phase," he blurted out, and I felt a surge of contempt for him. He was grasping at straws, trying to salvage whatever dignity he had left. "Just a phase?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "You think that's going to fly? You've betrayed your wife and my wife, this isn't some high school fling." I could see the cracks in his facade starting to deepen, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. He looked at my wife, his expression shifting from panic to something darker, a flash of anger that made my stomach twist. "You told me you wanted to keep this between us," he spat, his voice rising. "You said it was just a little fun." The room felt like it was about to explode. Her best friend stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "So you admit it then? You were sleeping with her?" "Not like that," he defended weakly, though the guilt was clear on his face. "We were just..." "Just what?" she interrupted, her voice sharp. "Just having fun at the expense of our marriage? You thought this was all a game?" As her voice rang out, I felt a surge of satisfaction. The truth was out, and they were both reeling from the consequences of their actions. I had achieved what I set out to do, destroying the fragile trust that bound their marriages together. My wife stood silently, her expression shifting between fear and defiance. I could see her weighing her next move, and part of me wondered if she still believed she could fix this, could salvage something from the wreckage of our lives. But she had crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let her walk away from this unscathed. The chaos was palpable, and it felt like the ground beneath us was shifting, ready to swallow us whole. The tension in the room was electric, each heartbeat pounding like a war drum. I watched as my wife's facade cracked further, the panic in her eyes morphing into something resembling defiance. She was cornered, and I knew she could either lash out or try to play the victim. Her best friend's gaze darted back to me, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You knew all along?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. "You sat there and let this happen?" "I didn't let it happen," I replied coolly. "I had to wait for the right moment. I wanted you to see for yourself what kind of person she really is." At that, my wife exploded. "You're acting like you're so innocent," she shouted, the veneer of calm shattering. "You think I wanted this to happen? You think I wanted to hurt anyone?" "Yes," I shot back, my voice rising to match hers. "You made that choice the moment you let him kiss you, the moment you decided to betray your best friend. You don't get to act like you're the moral authority here," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You followed me. You were spying on me." "Damn right I was," I countered, my blood boiling. "You turned our marriage into a joke, and you think I'm just going to sit back and let it happen?" Her best friend stood between us, a storm of emotions swirling in her eyes. "This is sick. Both of you. You've ruined everything." Her voice was steady, but I could see the hurt threatening to break through. "Maybe it's time for you to decide what you want," I said to her best friend, turning my focus to her. "Do you want to keep pretending everything is fine? Or do you want to confront the reality of what he's done?" She looked at her husband, her expression hardening. "I want the truth. No more lies." "I can explain," he pleaded, desperation oozing from his every word. But I could see it in her eyes, the moment she realized that he wasn't worth the trouble. The love she once felt was slipping through her fingers like sand. "I'm done," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I'm done with all of this." With that, the dam burst. Tears flowed freely as her best friend stepped back, the betrayal overwhelming her. My wife reached for her, but her friend recoiled, pushing her away. "You don't get to touch me," she hissed, and I felt a sense of finality in her words. The friendship they had cherished was obliterated, and I felt a twisted satisfaction in knowing I had set this chaos in motion. As I stood there, the aftermath of the evening settled around us like a shroud. I felt raw and exposed, a mixture of rage and sadness coursing through me. My wife's pleas fell on deaf ears, and the weight of our shattered marriage loomed heavy in the air. I turned to leave, knowing I had done what I set out to do. I had ripped apart the fabric of our lives, and there was no going back. Outside her best friend's house, I paused, feeling the cool night air wash over me. I stood there, waiting for the chaos to unfold, knowing that everything had changed forever. What would you do if your partner cheated with someone so close to your life? Would you keep it quiet or make sure everyone knew the truth?